Hi, I'm Lana. I built my restaurant chain from scratch. No investors, no family handouts, just long nights and calloused hands. And the moment I made it, my parents and sisters sat me down and told me to hand over half of it, because it was family. No thank you. No congratulations. Just give it to us. They didn't care what I sacrificed. They only cared it was finally valuable. What kind of family sees your success as their entitlement? I still remember the envelope. White, stiff, expensive, the kind that felt like it was meant for someone else. My name, Lana Thornton, was written in my mother's familiar cursive, the loops neat but cold. Inside, a gold-embossed invitation shimmered beneath the kitchen light. Arthur and Vera Thornton cordially invite you to their 40th wedding anniversary. I stared at the date, at the address of that downtown Charleston ballroom where everything important in our family seemed to happen, without me. For a long minute, I just stood there at the counter, the smell of roasted garlic and fresh basil surrounding me like armor. The dinner rush had ended, my restaurant quiet except for the faint hum of the refrigerators. I flipped the invitation over, searching for some handwritten note, some acknowledgement beyond formality. Nothing. Just the printed words and my parents' names. I told myself I didn't care. I was busy, successful, booked solid for the next 3 weekends. Yet something tugged at me, a strange, guilty sense of duty. I decided to go. Not to celebrate, but to prove to myself that I could stand in that room and not crumble this time. The night of the banquet arrived humid and heavy, as most Charleston nights do. My car tires crunched over gravel as I pulled up to the hall, its windows glowing gold through the trees. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror, hair pulled back, black dress, steady breath. I looked like someone prepared for battle. Walking inside, I was hit with the scent of roses and champagne. People I hadn't seen in years turned toward me with polite smiles. "Lana, you look wonderful," they said, voices smooth with surprise. It was the same tone they used when they realized the forgotten daughter had somehow built something real. And then I saw her. Isolde. My older sister, gliding across the room like she owned the light itself. She wore red, of course she did, and had our mother's pearl necklace around her throat. She spotted me, raised her glass, and mouthed, "You came." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Dinner blurred into small talk. My parents sat at the head table, beaming, Isolde beside them. I was placed further down, near the end, close enough to be visible in photographs but far enough not to interrupt. Plates clinked, laughter rose, and I found myself tracing the condensation on my wine glass just to keep from tapping my fingers. Then it happened. The microphone squealed softly as Isolde stood up, holding a flute of champagne. "Before we toast," she said, voice clear, practiced, "I just want to take a moment to thank my parents, for their love, and for always believing in me. And, of course, for inspiring me to follow my passion. Many of you know I've been growing Soulstone Kitchen, our family restaurant chain." The room applauded. My fork froze midway to my mouth. "Our family restaurant," she said again, smiling toward my parents, who looked at her like she had hung the moon. I couldn't have done it without them. A few guests turned to me, expecting me to nod along, to confirm this beautiful fiction. I couldn't move. My throat went dry. That restaurant, those recipes, that sweat-stained apron, those nights I slept on the office couch, they were mine. Mine alone. I managed a polite half-smile, the kind that keeps peace in rooms where truth isn't welcome. My father raised his glass toward Isolde. "To our brilliant daughter," he said. "Always the one with vision." It was like the air thinned. I couldn't hear the music anymore, just the thud of my own pulse. My mother laughed, delicate and proud, as if the entire business had grown from Isolde's imagination. Nobody corrected her. Nobody looked my way. I stayed seated through dessert, the chocolate melting untouched. I remembered being 16, making their anniversary cake from scratch, while my parents praised Isolde's college scholarship. I remembered the nights she borrowed money from me and never paid it back. The days she said, "You're just good at baking, Lana. It's cute." When the speeches ended, people danced. I slipped out quietly, my heels echoing on the marble. The valet didn't even notice me leaving. Outside, the humid air hit like a wave, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. The city felt hollow on the drive home. Storefronts glowed in the dark, streetlights painting streaks across my windshield. I turned off the radio, letting silence stretch between me and the steering wheel. Every word from that banquet replayed in my head: our restaurant, co-founder, vision. Each syllable scraped against something tender. By the time I reached my townhouse, the clock read nearly midnight. I kicked off my shoes, dropped my purse on the sofa, and went straight to my office. The desk lamp flickered on, revealing stacks of invoices, folders, and one old envelope tucked beneath a pile of tax returns. It was yellowed at the edges, my father's handwriting across the top. Signature request, business reclassification. I remembered the day he'd handed it to me, years ago, saying, "Just sign, sweetheart. It's for legal purposes. Keeps things simple." I had trusted him. I always did. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. The paper inside smelled faintly of dust and betrayal. At the top, typed in bold letters, were the words, "Transfer of shared business interest to Isolde Thornton." For a second, the world tilted. I reread the lines, my eyes darting over the signatures, mine and my father's at the bottom. I had signed away half my company without ever knowing it. I pressed a hand to my chest, trying to breathe, but the air felt sharp, foreign. I walked to the kitchen, poured myself a glass of water, and leaned against the counter where I'd built everything, where I'd mixed dough, tested sauces, dreamed of independence. Now I realized I had handed my dream over in a single naive stroke of a pen. The clock on the wall ticked louder than usual. I thought of my parents, smiling at that banquet, proud of the daughter who'd stolen my name, my work, my place in the story. I thought of how easily they'd erased me, and how I had let them. But beneath the ache, something colder began to rise. Not sadness. Not even rage. Something steadier, resolve. I folded the document carefully and slid it back into the envelope, this time writing across the front in red ink, "Evidence." I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the doorway for a long time, watching the moonlight spill across the countertop. My life had been one long shift, cooking, cleaning, serving, always invisible. But tonight, I finally saw what they'd done. And yet, the pain wasn't what broke me, it was the silence that followed. That night, sleep refused to come. The ceiling above my bed was just a stretch of shadow, my mind spinning through every word I'd ever swallowed. The silence that followed the discovery of that document was louder than any argument could have been. I lay there until dawn began to crawl through the curtains, brushing pale light across my nightstand. I couldn't stay still any longer. I got up, brewed coffee so strong it burned my throat, and sat at the kitchen table surrounded by bills, old ledgers, and unopened letters from my parents. One of them still bore the wax seal of Soulstone Kitchen, back when I thought the name meant family. My fingers traced the embossed logo like it was a wound. I thought about when it all began, before the lawyers, before the lies, 5 years earlier, in Savannah. Back then, I was 37, exhausted but proud. I'd rented a little storefront near River Street, painted the walls myself, and opened the doors to my first restaurant. No investors, no safety net, just me, a few savings, and a small business loan. The grand opening was on a Saturday morning, the air thick with salt from the river. I remember the hum of the espresso machine, the smell of pecan pie cooling by the window. Customers trickled in, neighbors stopped by with flowers. It felt pure. Mine. 3 days later, my parents showed up unannounced. My father stood outside the glass door, inspecting the sign like a building inspector checking for code violations. My mother followed, her heels clicking on the tile, her lips pursed. "This is quaint," she said finally, scanning the tables, the chalkboard menu. "But, sweetheart, don't you think you're putting a lot on your plate?" I wiped my hands on my apron. "I'm managing fine, Mom. We're almost sold out every day since we opened." Dad crossed his arms. "We just don't want you making decisions that might jeopardize the family name." That phrase again, the family name, as if my existence was a PR campaign. What does that even mean? I asked, laughing softly. He looked at my mother, then back at me. "Well, for starters, it might be better if we presented Isolde as the public face. She has the degree, the polish. You know how the media can be." The words sank slow, like oil in water. "You're saying I should put her name on my business?" "Not on paper," Mom added quickly, "just for appearances. She's got a strong social following, it'll help you. A little family branding never hurts." I remember how the fluorescent lights flickered then, as if the room itself recoiled. I wanted to scream. Instead, I smiled, small, tight. "If you're worried about how it looks, you don't have to be involved." Mom frowned. "Don't be defensive, Lana. We're only trying to help. You've always been more of a doer than a talker." Dad chuckled like he'd heard something amusing. "Let your sister handle the spotlight. You stick to the kitchen. It's what you're good at." They left soon after, satisfied with their advice. I watched them walk away through the window, my reflection hovering faintly beside theirs. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been quietly taken from me, though I couldn't name what yet. Months passed. Soulstone Kitchen grew faster than I could keep up with. My parents' friends began visiting, taking pictures with Isolde whenever she dropped by. She'd smile for the camera, toss her hair, and call me our genius chef. The first time she said it, I thought it was a joke. By the fifth, it was branding. She started showing up at media interviews, ones I didn't schedule. A journalist from Southern Living asked her what inspired our little restaurant empire. She said, "It started with a dream we both had, bringing our grandmother's recipes to life." I stood just off camera, holding a tray of muffins, listening to her rewrite history in real time. My staff clapped when the article came out. "You and your sister make such a great team," one of the cooks said, smiling. "She's a natural spokesperson." I laughed it off, but later, in the walk-in cooler, I gripped a shelf to keep from shaking. The cold bit through my sleeves, grounding me in its sting. It wasn't just unfair, it was strategic. Every article, every photo, every soundbite built a narrative that I didn't exist without her. One afternoon, I walked into the office and found Isolde leaning over my computer, typing fast. "What are you doing?" I asked, voice flat. She turned, startled for a second, then smiled too brightly. "Just updating the press kit. Don't worry, I send it to Mom for review. You know she loves to keep things polished." "Mom?" I repeated, trying not to raise my voice. "This isn't a family scrapbook. It's my business." "Lana," she sighed, like she was explaining something to a child, "you're the creative one. I'm just helping with the logistics. You should thank me. Without good PR, nobody would know about your little biscuits." My little biscuits. I almost laughed. But laughter stuck in my throat, sharp and useless. That winter, we held our first staff appreciation dinner. It was supposed to be a small thank you, 12 people, soft music, good wine. I spent the day preparing the menu myself: roasted duck, truffle mashed potatoes, cranberry compote. Everyone arrived dressed up, cheerful. The wine flowed, the room warm with laughter. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could breathe again. Then Isolde tapped her glass. "Before we end the night," she said, standing tall, "I'd like to make a toast, on behalf of us both." The chatter died down. My heart clenched. "Us both?" I asked, quietly, though nobody heard. "To family," she continued, "and to this incredible journey we've built together." People raised their glasses. My name wasn't mentioned. I could hear blood rushing in my ears, that strange hollow sound before tears. I looked at her, the way her diamond earrings caught the light, the way my parents' words echoed in her tone. She believed this story. Maybe she always had. I wanted to shout, "You weren't there when I scrubbed grease off the floor. You weren't there when the pipes burst at 2 a.m. But all I did was set my napkin down. The table blurred as I stood, my smile brittle. "Excuse me," I said softly. Someone called after me, "Everything okay?" I nodded, the lice smooth from years of practice. Outside, the air was cold enough to sting. I leaned against the brick wall and let the sound of laughter fade behind me. For the first time, I realized silence wasn't peace, it was surrender. That night, I drove home with my headlights off for half a block, just to feel unseen. Once inside, I locked the door and stood in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. My hands still smelled of rosemary and steel. I thought about all the things I'd given up quietly: credit, pride, even my own name. Then something shifted. Maybe it was exhaustion, maybe anger too long buried. I walked to my office, turned on my laptop, and began typing "business ownership dispute." I didn't even know what I was looking for, just that I couldn't stay blind any longer. Hours passed. I learned about clauses, ownership structures, non-contested transfers, the fine print that buries people like me. And there it was, in black and white, a clause in the paper I'd signed, buried deep. Upon joint acknowledgement, ownership is assumed by the named co-founder in the absence of formal dispute. In the absence of dispute. Meaning if I stayed silent, she owned everything. I laughed, quietly, bitterly. The kind of laugh that sounds like breaking glass. They hadn't just asked for my silence. They'd built their empire on it. The next morning, I made an appointment with a small business attorney downtown. The receptionist asked, "Nature of consultation?" and I said, "Family and fraud." The words tasted strange together, but right. When my mother called that afternoon, I lied. Told her I was meeting with a supplier. She reminded me to smile at the cameras during next week's charity event. "You and Isolde are the face of Soulstone," she said warmly. I hung up before answering. That evening, as I drove toward the law office, the sunset bled across the horizon, turning the marshes gold. I rolled down the window, letting the wind tangle my hair. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about the menu, or the payroll, or my parents' approval. I was thinking about my name, Lana Thornton, and how I was going to take it back. They had taught me to be silent. But silence signs your life away. The silence that followed didn't end that night, it stretched, day after day, like fog creeping under every door of my life. I thought knowing the truth would bring clarity, but it didn't. It only made the quiet heavier. Sometimes silence isn't peace, it's pressure. I started thinking back, trying to understand how it had come to this. Maybe the answer wasn't in the papers or contracts, it was buried years before, back when I learned to say yes even when I wanted to scream no. Growing up as the youngest meant my world revolved around compromise. I was the afterthought child, the one who cleaned up after other people's mistakes. "Be a good girl, Lana," my mother would say whenever my sister cried or threw a tantrum. You're more patient. You understand better. When Isolde wanted the bigger bedroom, I moved my things without a word. When she crashed my bike, I apologized for leaving it unlocked. When she forgot her lines in the school play, I blamed myself for distracting her backstage. It became a pattern, her drama, my apology. But the real betrayal came later. I was 17 when I got accepted to a culinary arts program in New Orleans. It was my dream, my ticket out of that house. The letter had barely landed in my hands when my father called me into the living room. He was sitting with Isolde and Mom, both smiling too politely. Your sister just got into Parsons, Dad said, beaming. Fashion in New York. Can you believe it? I smiled because that's what I was supposed to do. Then he added, we can only afford to send one of you right now. But you'll have other chances, sweetheart. You're still young. I remember the way my throat closed up, how the letter in my hand felt suddenly ridiculous. So I'll wait? I asked, pretending I didn't already know the answer. Mom patted my knee. You're such a giver, Lana. You'll make something of yourself one day, I just know it. That's how it started, the long tradition of giving up so Isolde could shine. She got New York. I got a job at a diner, saving tips in a mason jar. And for years, I believed that was love, sacrifice wrapped up in guilt and good manners. It wasn't until my business grew that I realized how deep those old patterns ran. Even now, decades later, they still expected my silence. I was cleaning out invoices one morning when I saw an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. No return address, but it was postmarked from Atlanta. Inside was a formal letter, neat, sharp, sterile. Notice of intent to file civil claim. My stomach tightened. The words blurred as I read them again. Isolde was suing me for a 50% stake in the company, using that promotional document from years ago as proof of co-ownership. My pulse hammered in my ears. I checked the date twice, then sat down at the counter, staring at the paper like it might bite. The next call came 20 minutes later, from my parents. Lana, Mom began, her voice sticky sweet, we just heard from Isolde. She's distraught. Distraught. I repeated, laughing without humor. She's suing me, Mom. Dad's voice cut in, calm, patronizing. You know how misunderstandings can happen in business. Maybe it's best if you just settle quietly. No need to drag the family name through court. There it was again, the family name, that invisible chain they loved to wrap around my neck. So you knew, I said, my voice flat. Of course not, Mom rushed in. We only just heard. But if this is what she feels she's owed. Owed? My voice cracked, sharper than I meant. She's owed nothing. She never worked a single shift, never invested a cent, never showed up when I needed help. And you're telling me to settle? Dad sighed, the sound of a man inconvenienced. She's your sister. You two can sort this out without lawyers. Just be reasonable. I pressed the phone to my ear so hard it hurt. You're not surprised she sued me, I said quietly. You're surprised I'm not giving in. The line went silent. Then Mom murmured, Lana, you've always had such a temper. Don't make this worse. I hung up. That afternoon, I sat in my office staring out the window. Rain streaked the glass, blurring the city beyond. My phone buzzed non-stop, texts, emails, even reporters calling for comment. Word had gotten out. The headlines were predictable, sisters at war over family restaurant chain. Customers started whispering. Some even boycotted, posting on social media about how sad it was to see family torn apart by greed. They didn't know the truth. To them, I was the selfish one. The villain. One of my waitresses came into the office that week, hesitant. "Miss Lana," she said softly, "a woman from Channel 5 came by. She wanted to know if you'd be making a public statement." I smiled tightly. "Tell her my lawyer speaks for me now." When she left, I just sat there, alone in the quiet dining room of my second location. The chairs were still stacked, the scent of yeast and lemon cleaner clinging to the air. For the first time in months, I wondered if maybe they were right, maybe I was the problem. Maybe silence had protected me because the truth would only make me look worse. How did I become the villain in my own story? I thought about that all night. By morning, exhaustion had hardened into resolve. If she wanted to play legal games, I'd learn the rules. 2 days later, I drove to Atlanta to meet a forensic accountant recommended by my attorney. Her name was Diana, a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes and no patience for small talk. She looked over my stack of receipts, time cards, and contracts like she was reading a crime scene. "You've got a trail," she said finally. "But it's messy. We'll need digital backups, bank deposits, vendor transactions, staff rosters. Anything that proves ownership." "I have all of it," I said. "Every payroll, every shift schedule. I just never thought I'd need it." Diana nodded. "People rarely do until family gets involved." For hours, we went over numbers, timestamps, email exchanges, every line of proof that a soul had no stake in my work. When we finished, I felt drained but strangely lighter. Facts were cold comfort, but at least they couldn't lie. That evening, I checked into a small hotel near Peachtree Street. The city buzzed below my window, traffic, sirens, laughter from the bar across the street. I sat on the edge of the bed, scrolling through old photos on my phone. There was one from years ago, me and Isolde as kids, holding cupcakes we'd baked for our father's birthday. She was grinning at the camera, I was looking at her. Even then, I wasn't the subject, I was the backdrop. I closed my eyes, inhaled deeply, and let the phone drop beside me. The next morning, I sent the first batch of documents to my lawyer. Within hours, she replied with a single line, "You've got a solid case." For the first time in months, I smiled. It wasn't joy, it was relief. I'd spent my whole life letting other people tell my story. Now, I was writing my own. If she wanted to bring fire to my door, I'd bring facts to hers. But facts alone don't win wars, especially when the enemy is family. The warning they ignored. I woke the next morning with a heaviness I couldn't shake, a quiet ache that lurked just beneath the surface. The previous night's revelations had settled like dust in my lungs. I rolled out of bed, pulled on a worn flannel shirt, and headed downstairs. The kitchen smelled faintly of rosemary and yesterday's coffee, as if nothing had changed. But everything had. I brewed another pot, poured a mug, and walked out onto the front porch of my townhouse in Charleston. The early sun shone through the live oaks, casting dappled light on my driveway. Usually I'd go over emails, review the day's schedule, but today I only sat. I thought about the dinners I had cooked, the recipes I'd perfected, the nights I worked until the ovens cooled and the lights went off. My name on the door. My dream. And somehow, under the same roof I considered my own, they had constructed a lie. By lunchtime, I had driven to the warehouse, a side location we used for storage on James Island. The forklifts beeping, boxes stacked high, the subtle hum of refrigeration, they were normal. My assistant, Jared, approached with a clipboard in hand. "Lana," he said quietly, "there's been a spike in vendor complaints. That new account is disputing the invoices again." I glanced at him. "Thanks for letting me know." He hesitated. "Do you need anything else?" I shook my head. "I've got it, Jared." He nodded, walked off, and I realized I was talking to them like a CEO already. Funny, because I had always believed I was the owner. Later that afternoon, I sent out the invitations. Not for a gracious lunch, but for a family meeting. October, my parents' home near Sullivan's Island. I didn't dress it up. I just wrote, dinner, Thursday 6 p.m., discussion of business and family. There were no polite niceties. No sugarcoating. I accepted nothing less than attention. When Thursday arrived, I left the restaurant a little early, the sky over the harbor cloudy and pressing. Rain threatened. The old house smelled like cedar and salt. My parents greeted me at the door with their usual smiles, perfume and aftershave mixed heavy in the air. Isolde stood behind them, in red again, a glass of wine in her hand. The sound of her heels clicking on the hardwood floor echoed like a metronome of discomfort. We sat in the dining room at the round oak table. A crystal bowl of salad sat untouched in front of me. My parents exchanged glances that said they had prepared this moment long before they invited me. So I took a breath and began. "Thanks for having me," I said. My voice was calm. "I'm here because something isn't right." My father leaned forward. "What do you mean?" My mother shifted in her seat, eyes flicking to Isolde. "You're welcome here anytime, Lana." "I appreciate that," I replied, "but I'm talking about the business. Soulstone Kitchen. You keep referring to it as a family venture. Yet I can't find any language that designates Isolde as anything other than a guest in this company." Silence settled. My mother looked away, and my father's jaw tightened. I slid a folder across the table. The pages rattled. Here are records, vendor receipts, employee logs, even security footage from last year showing Isolde on-site fewer than 10 times while I managed daily operations. I want to know how someone who's rarely present becomes co-founder. My mother's face froze. My father scoffed. "Families don't require paperwork. You're overthinking this." I met his gaze. "I am thinking this, because you built a contract around lies. And they signed it without knowing." My father's nostrils flared. "You signed because you trusted us." "I trusted myself more." Isolde chuckled softly. "Oh, Lana, you really are a stubborn little sister." I said nothing. Instead, I recorded the moment. I captured her tone, her expression. Later I'd wish I hadn't looked at the sparkle in her eyes. I watched as the conversation broke into familiar ground. "Why are you doing this now? Are you trying to divide the family? You built this from nothing. Are you saying you did it alone?" My mother's voice raised. "We raised 2 daughters. We expect you to show gratitude." I settled deeper in my chair. Expressing appreciation doesn't mean handing over my company. Isolde leaned in. "You're going to regret this, you know." A grin stretched across her face, and the kind of cold a person holds when they believe the game is already won. But I didn't flinch. Not because I was brave, but because I had no other path. After dinner, almost nothing happened, no desserts, no final toasts. I walked out while they remained frozen in their seats. Rain fell softly as I approached my car, dark droplets on the windshield. I didn't look back. The next day, I began watching the news feed only to find a thread online, local business forum buzzing with the headline, "Family Dinner Ends in Public Business Showdown." I closed my laptop, poured a glass of white wine, and sat in my office for a long time. I didn't feel victorious. I felt exposed. But I also felt awake. That evening I recorded a voice note and sent it to Isolde. "I didn't build this empire to fight you. But if you keep pushing, I'll make sure you never use my name again." I hit send. Then I filed a cease and desist document to her lawyer. Silence followed. A silence so loud I could hear my own heartbeat. I leaned back in the chair, hands clasped. I wasn't smiling. But I wasn't afraid. They had ignored my warnings. And when peace fails, sometimes war becomes necessary. When peace fails, sometimes war becomes necessary. That thought stayed with me through the night like a quiet drumbeat beneath my ribs. I didn't want a war, not with blood that shared my last name, but they had already drawn the first strike. And this time, I wasn't going to let silence sign away what was mine. The morning air was damp when I walked into my office. The smell of ground coffee mixed with printer ink, that faint metallic scent of paperwork and exhaustion. I was sorting through contracts when the courier arrived. A man in a navy uniform, polite but impersonal, handed me a thick envelope stamped with legal insignia. "For Miss Thornton," he said. I signed, thanked him, and waited until he was gone before opening it. Inside, another letter, this time not from Isolde, but from my parents. The words were cold, detached, full of clauses and subparagraphs. Notice of claim, request for relinquishment of 50% intellectual and financial property rights. My throat went dry. I reread the letter twice. The signatures at the bottom were familiar, Arthur and Vera Thornton. My parents had gone from pleading to litigating. I called my lawyer, Elaine, who had become my only constant in this entire storm. Her voice came through the phone, low and steady. "They're trying to wear you down, Lana. It's not about winning, it's about exhausting you. People give up when they're tired." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "Well," I said, "they'll have to work harder. I've been tired my entire life." That afternoon, I took the letter home and read it again at the dining table. The same table where, years ago, we'd shared Sunday dinners, roast chicken, laughter, my mother's apple pie. Back then, I believed we were a family. Now, the only thing shared between us was litigation. The next day, I met Elaine downtown. Her office overlooked the harbor, all glass and gray light. She spread the letter across the table. "They're pushing the narrative that Soulstone's intellectual property, recipes, designs, trademarks, originated from your family. Not you." I let out a bitter laugh. "They think love and ownership are the same thing." "Not love," she corrected gently. "Control." Her words hit like truth always does, quiet but final. When I left the office, Charleston's air felt heavier. Clouds gathered over the bay. On the drive home, rain streaked across the windshield, blurring the city lights into ribbons. By the time I parked in front of my house, I'd already decided something. I wasn't going to let them rewrite my story again. The next week brought a new kind of betrayal. I was in the restaurant office reviewing invoices when one of my former employees, a young woman named Brooke, showed up unannounced. Her eyes darted around nervously as she stepped inside. "I didn't know where else to go," she said, clutching a folder to her chest. "Take a seat," I told her, motioning toward the chair opposite my desk. "What's going on?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Isolde offered me money, to say you were unstable. That you'd had breakdowns, that you weren't fit to run the business." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the edge of the desk. "She said that?" Brooke nodded. "She wanted me to testify if things went to court. Said she could make it worth my while. I told her no, but she said she'd find someone else who would." I took a slow breath, forcing calm. My voice came out quieter than I expected. "Thank you for telling me." She looked down, ashamed. "I should have told you sooner." "You told me now," I said softly. "That's what matters." After she left, I sat there in the stillness, the hum of the refrigerator in the hallway filling the room. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because the pain had already turned into something else. something sharper. I opened my laptop, created a new folder, and labeled it case evidence. I uploaded Brooks' recorded statement, the copies of the false contracts, the footage of Isolde's media interviews. Every piece of deceit went in that folder. For years, they had built their power on my silence. Now I was building my defense with their words. That night, I didn't sleep. I planned. 2 days later, I called Elaine again. I want to restructure the company, I said. Everything, ownership, assets, protection. She hesitated. That's a big step. So is betrayal. By the end of the week, Soulstone Kitchen was no longer a sole proprietorship. It was an S-corp, every document notarized, every share registered, every file secured. I changed all passwords, installed an internal surveillance system, and created digital backups stored off-site. I watermarked every recipe and encrypted the archives. For the first time in months, I felt control returning to me, piece by piece. I had always been the one who cooked, cleaned, created. Now I was also the one who fortified. Days passed quietly. Too quietly. Then came the calm that never lasts. One evening, after closing, I sat in my office with the lights dimmed. The hum of the cooler, the faint tick of the clock, the smell of flour, it all felt like before, but nothing was the same. I opened a blank document on my laptop and began to write. Dear Mother, Father, and Isolde. I've given you years of patience and understanding. You've mistaken both for weakness. I'm done now. The next time we speak, it'll be in front of a judge. I printed the letter, signed it, sealed 3 copies in separate envelopes, and mailed them the next morning. No dramatic confrontation, no final plea. Just a quiet line drawn in ink. For 3 days, there was nothing. No calls, no messages, no social media noise. The silence almost felt peaceful, until whispers started to reach me through friends, colleagues, even vendors. They're planning something, one of my suppliers said cautiously over the phone. Something big. Another texted me a screenshot of a group chat among local business owners, rumors swirling that my restaurants were under investigation, that the real founder was preparing to reclaim her rightful share. I set the phone down, exhaled slowly, and looked around my office. The walls, the framed photos, the trophies, everything I had built from burnt fingertips and sleepless nights, was now under siege. But this time, I wasn't the girl who stayed quiet. I stood, locked the office door behind me, and walked out into the crisp evening air. The city was alive outside, cars passing, laughter spilling from nearby bars, the faint smell of rain in the wind. It was strange how the world kept turning even when yours was on fire. As I walked to my car, my reflection caught in the glass window of the bakery. For a moment, I barely recognized her, the woman staring back, eyes clear, jaw set. She looked tired but unbreakable. They want a war, I murmured to myself. Fine. Let them have one. Then I smiled, not because I felt joy, but because for the first time, I understood something my parents never did. Silence was never my weakness. It was my weapon, waiting for the right time to speak. And that time had come. Then they tried to take everything at once. The first sign came quietly, as it always does, with an envelope. This one arrived on a Thursday morning, the kind of morning where the sky can't decide between rain or sunlight. It wasn't legal mail this time. No official stamp, no lawyer's letterhead. Just handwriting, my mother's, neat and deliberate, like she'd practiced it her whole life. Inside, a single note on ivory stationery. Family dinner. Saturday. 6 p.m. Sacramento. Let's put this all behind us. I read it 3 times, waiting for the words to change, for the trap to reveal itself. After everything, after the lies, the lawsuits, the manipulation, they wanted dinner. When I told Diana, my accountant, she leaned back in her chair, arms folded. "They're not inviting you for reconciliation," she said flatly. "They're setting the stage. They want something recorded, something emotional they can use later." "I figured," I replied. She studied me for a moment. "Still go. Just to hear them out. But protect yourself. You know how." I nodded, sliding my hand into my purse where I kept a small, discreet recorder, one that looked like a key fob. I'd bought it months ago but never used it. Until now. The flight from Charleston to Sacramento was uneventful, but I spent every minute of it rehearsing what I'd say, or what I wouldn't. The plane descended through hazy skies, the kind that turned gold before sunset. As the wheels touched the tarmac, I decided that if this dinner was a performance, I'd sit front row and watch them expose themselves. The Thornton house looked exactly as I remembered, grand, manicured, cold. My mother opened the door before I even rang the bell. Her smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. "Lana. You look thin," she said, pulling me into a hug that felt more like a restraint than affection. "I've been working," I replied simply. Inside, everything gleamed, the chandelier, the silver, even the smiles. Isolde was already there, wearing something designer and red, always red, the color of power disguised as elegance. My father stood by the bar, pouring himself a drink. "We're glad you came," he said, his tone smooth as whiskey. "Curiosity gets the better of me sometimes," I answered. We sat at the table, the four of us. Roast lamb, mashed potatoes, my mother's classic dinner rolls. It was domestic theater, every detail staged, every utensil placed with intent. For a while, conversation stayed polite. My mother asked about business. My father made small talk about the weather back east. Even Isolde pretended civility, serving me a slice of lamb with exaggerated grace. And yet, beneath the polished surface, I could hear the tension humming, like a wire pulled too tight. Halfway through dessert, the performance shifted. My father cleared his throat and produced a folder from beneath the table. "Your mother and I have prepared something," he began, sliding the papers toward me. I didn't touch them. "It's a proposal," he continued, "for family unity. To put this ugliness behind us once and for all." My mother nodded. "It's what's best for everyone. Especially you, dear." I glanced down at the folder. The first page was titled Revised Partnership Agreement. My name was there, just below Isolde's, but mine was smaller, secondary, almost decorative. I looked up slowly. "You're kidding." Isolde sipped her wine. "You always take things so personally. What's personal about you trying to rob me?" My father's tone hardened. "Lana, this isn't robbery. It's restoration. You wouldn't have what you have without this family." I laughed then, quietly, bitterly. "You mean without me cooking through the night? Without me cleaning grease traps when everyone else was asleep? Without me selling my car to keep the first restaurant open?" My mother's voice sharpened. "You built it using our recipes. Our traditions." "Traditions," I repeated, my voice rising. "Not contracts. Not labor. You can't trademark a family dinner." That's when Isolde leaned forward, smiling like she'd been waiting for this cue. "You wouldn't dare drag your own blood to court," she whispered, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "You may own the kitchen, but I own the narrative." My pulse quickened. I reached into my purse and pressed a small button. The recorder had been on since I'd walked in. "Let me stop you right there," I said, interrupting their perfectly rehearsed play. "Did you rehearse this together? The concerned parents, the wounded sister, the olive branch." My father glared. Watch your tone. I ignored him. Because it sounds familiar. Almost like something I heard earlier this week. I took out my phone, tapped play, and set it on the table. Isolde's voice filled the room, clear, crisp, unmistakable. Don't worry, she'll come. She's too proud not to. And when she does, she'll be stupid enough to fall for this dinner trap. For a moment, the only sound was the hum of the air conditioner. My father froze. My mother's fork slipped from her hand and clattered against the plate. Isolde's face drained of color. You recorded me. I learned from the best, I said evenly. You taught me that silence can be rewritten. I prefer the truth on tape. I stood, sliding another envelope from my bag. That's my official cease and desist. Consider it my RSVP for the next court hearing. No one spoke. I turned to leave. My heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing down the hallway like punctuation. At the door, my mother's voice trembled behind me. Lana, please don't do this. I paused. You should have said that before you set the table. I walked out into the night, the air cold and sharp, headlights reflecting off the wet pavement. The drive back to the hotel was a blur of red lights and white lines. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I just kept my hands steady on the wheel, breathing in rhythm with the storm outside. But the ambush wasn't over. When I got to the hotel, I checked my phone. Dozens of notifications. Bank alerts. System pings. My stomach dropped. Unauthorized login attempts, my personal bank, my business account, even my online recipe archive. Someone was trying to breach everything at once. Then came the texts from my clients. Hey, Lana, did you mean to have someone named Isolde reach out about co-ownership details? Another, your sister called asking for our contract copies. Said she's taking over operations. I sat down hard on the edge of the bed, fingers trembling. They hadn't wasted a single hour. I called Elaine, my lawyer, voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. File a temporary restraining order, I said. First thing tomorrow. Against all three of them. On what grounds? She asked. Fraud, harassment, attempted access to protected business property. There was a pause. Then she said, understood. I'll have it drafted by sunrise. When I hung up, I stared at the city skyline through the window. Sacramento slept, oblivious. In the reflection, I saw myself again, hair tangled, face pale, eyes burning. The version of me they had underestimated for years was gone. They wanted a family dinner. They got a declaration of war. But they weren't done trying to ruin me. Not even close. The whispers started at lunch. I'd been wrapping up a meeting with Diana in the conference room on the second floor of my flagship restaurant, windows overlooking the harbor, the faint salt breeze drifting through open blinds. We reviewed audit logs and discussed next steps for freezing assets when a text popped onto my phone. We saw the posts. Want to talk? It was from one of my senior managers, Mark. I tapped his name and he asked softly, have you seen the business forum on Facebook? People are blaming you for everything. My heart jolted. I stood and walked toward the window, watching a tugboat pull a container ship into port. The sky was steel gray, the kind of Charleston afternoon that feels like it's holding its breath. I took a deep exhale. Show me, I said. By the time I got back to my desk, I clicked the link and watched as dozens of comments scrolled. She fired the staff without notice. She changed the menu overnight and didn't tell us. Co-owner Isolde is handling our contracts now. The profile picture of the commenter was anonymous, the language sharp. Then came the Yelp reviews, suddenly, 10 in an hour, all posted under the name Soulstone Kitchen. Many were identical, short, angry, third-person statements. They treated me like an afterthought. One reply popped up, and I held my breath when I read it. Isolde Thornton, co-owner responding, "We are investigating." My jaw tightened. I didn't shout. I didn't cry. I simply closed the laptop and walked into the back-door kitchen, past the ovens and the prep tables where my staff were plating the evening service. I paused, inhaled deeply, and said to the head chef, "Mark, I just sent Diana copies of every invoice and review that went online. I need you to lock down employee time cards for the past year and hold them until I ask." Mark frowned. "Is everything okay, Lana?" "Not yet," I said, and I meant it. Later, I met Diana at her office again, this time in a small suite in the business district. She had already traced the IP addresses linked to the fake reviews and the email addresses spoofed to look like mine. One address flagged back to an IT firm in Sacramento, one of Isolde's recent partners. "Looks like your sister went heavy," Diana said, eyes steady behind her glasses. "Spoofed emails, backup website created, vendor invoices altered. Someone even sent a false contract to your top supplier asking to change payment terms." I exhaled, a sound I hadn't allowed myself in weeks. "She's been burning the house down around me." "And you're going to build a fire she can't walk through," Diana replied. The next morning, I filed an emergency motion in federal court to freeze any joint digital assets, block changes to our LLC filings, and demand immediate access to all business email archives. By midday, I sat in my empty corner office while staff rallied around me. A young waitress came by, her eyes wet. "Miss Lana," she said, "I've been here since we started that location. We believed you. We knew it wasn't true." Her voice cracked on the word "believed." I put my hand on her shoulder. "Thank you," I said. "We'll fix this." That evening, tired and wired, I posted a simple video on the restaurant's social media page, the kind of post I'd postponed for weeks. I looked directly into the camera, my kitchen behind me silent, stainless steel glinting under dim light. "I'm Lana Thornton, founder of Soulstone Kitchen. I've heard the rumors. I'm aware of the false accusations and unauthorized use of my name. Know this, I built this business from the ground up. I'm defending it, not because I want to fight, but because identity matters." Comments exploded. My loyal customers flooded the page with support. "We've been here from day one. Lana, we trust you." Orders climbed overnight. The line out front grew again. Vendors called. One longtime partner said, "If you need legal help, my cousin is a corporate litigator in Atlanta. Just say the word." In the silence of my office later, I let my shoulders drop. I didn't dance. I didn't smile. I wasn't done yet, but I felt the air shift. For decades I had accepted being invisible, now I was visible and not apologizing. I watched the sunset from the window. The sky turned orange and brushed into purple, a quiet reminder that every day ends, but tomorrow must begin differently. And just when I thought I was regaining ground, they forced my hand into war. They forced my hand into war, and I met the first day of battle dressed in a tailored navy suit instead of chef's whites. The courthouse doors in Charleston opened wide that morning, the sun bright and unforgiving, just like the truth I was about to lay bare. I arrived early, parking in the municipal garage 2 blocks away, walking the familiar cobblestones of King Street with purpose. My breathing was steady, though inside I felt the weight of every hour I spent building Soulstone Kitchen, every recipe tested, every shift without sleep, pressed into my rib cage. And then there it was, the banner outside the courthouse reading Thornton vs. Thornton Enterprises, trial begins. I swallowed hard and walked in. Act 1, Final Move. Inside the courtroom, I sat at the front row with my attorney Elaine beside me. On the defendant's side, my sister Isolde Thornton, my mother Vera Thornton, and my father Arthur Thornton. My mother folded her hands and looked away. My father's stare bore into me. Isolde smiled politely, as though this was a photo shoot. Elaine stood and addressed the judge. She laid out the charges: defamation, fraud, attempted hostile takeover of our registered S-corp. She referenced the recorded calls we had obtained, the IP logs, the vendor invoices altered to frame me, and the videos of Isolde pretending to operate the business when she wasn't even on site. I felt the moment it hit the defense when the judge looked at the evidence folder and said slowly, "These are serious allegations." I closed my eyes, remembering that I didn't choose this moment, it chose me. I opened them and watched my sister shift in her chair. For the first time, I didn't feel invisible. Act 2, Day in Court. The tension rose like tide coming in under a full moon. Witnesses testified. My accountant, Deanna, presented the forensic report. "Your Honor," she said, "the IP address traced back to Mr. Collins's IT firm, formerly connected to Miss Thornton." The courtroom held its breath. Isolde attempted a smile, but the surface cracked. She denied everything, said I had gone off the deep end, that I was disrupting the family legacy. My father spoke, voice low, "This is my daughter. She founded the chain." But then I stood and presented the receipts, my payroll logs, the night shifts I manned alone, the minutes when I answered calls at 3 a.m. People gasped in the gallery. One of my staff came forward and said, "We knew Miss Thornton built the business. We saw it. We believed her. I didn't want the spotlight. I just wanted justice." Act 3, Breaking Point, The Knees. The judge paused, cleared his throat. The courthouse seemed to shrink, the light from behind the tall windows glared like a searchlight. "I intend to rule in favor of the plaintiff," he said. My pulse thrummed in a steady rhythm. Then, behind me, a soft sound, my parents dropping to their knees. My mother's voice cracked, "Lana, please, we're sorry. Forgive us." My father's lips trembled. Isolde made me believe. We got it wrong." My face didn't flinch. I felt a cold calm. I rose and looked at them. "Forgiveness is earned," I said softly. "Not begged for when you lose." My voice didn't waver. My sister's face went white. The gallery leaned forward. The moment hung like the last leaf on a branch before the wind. Act 4, Judgment. The gavel fell. The judge ordered restitution, barred Isolde from any business dealings with Soulstone, placed her on probation for cyber fraud. My name, it was mine again. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I was holding. Outside, the cameras swarmed. Local news crews approached. Reporters asked if I was relieved or vindicated. I said, "I'm thankful. This company stood for something bigger than profit, it stood for dignity." My restaurant's website crashed under traffic. Orders soared. Staff cheered. I walked through the kitchen later that evening, the smell of lemons and basil strong in the air, pots bubbling. One of the sous chefs nodded to me and mouthed, "We did it." I nodded back. We had done it. But standing at the back door, watching the last delivery truck pull away, I realized something: victory isn't always loud. Sometimes the silent moments after the gavel are the ones you'll remember. But some wounds don't disappear with a verdict, they haunt you, quietly. The courtroom doors had finally closed, and yet, something inside of me remained open, wounded, aware. That morning I returned to Soulstone Kitchen's flagship location, the sun just beginning to warm the whitewashed facade. Flowers and handwritten notes greeted me at the front door, built by Lana. Protected by Lana. I paused for a moment in the foyer, absorbing the gratitude and the quiet relief that came with it. But under the surface of pride there was a tiredness, a fatigue fanned by years of being invisible. The lunch rush came early, local regulars, a few out-of-town visitors, the usual clink of silverware, the soft hum of conversation. I moved through the kitchen like a conductor, checking on the grill, nodding to the pastry team, letting the bread proof in its little corner while I slipped into the manager's office for 5 minutes. My phone buzzed reporting the verdict coverage, local news, national blogs, tweeted statements from other women in business. My scrolling finger paused on a comment. She never needed that family tree. She built her own root system. I smiled, though it felt more like a sigh. That afternoon I drove out to my childhood street, our old house in Charleston that my parents had finally put on the market. The grass was overgrown, the porch swing hung limp, the American flag faded in the breeze. I walked up the steps, each creak under my boots echoing memories I wasn't sure I wanted to revisit. Inside, I ran my hand along the wallpaper where we used to have birthday parties, heard the echo of laughter from decades ago. In the mailbox, I found a single envelope with my name in Dad's handwriting. I opened it outside and it contained only one line: "Let's start again. Please." No apology. No acknowledgement of what they had done. Just an invitation. My eyes stung. I folded it quietly and placed it back in the box. Back at the car, I stared at the clear blue sky through the windshield. I wasn't the same girl who had waited for their praise. I wasn't even the woman who accepted their terms. I was someone else entirely. I pressed my foot on the brake and exhaled. I was heading home, but I left something behind. Something small, hope that maybe they would change. Something large, the expectation that they would. I drove away without looking back. That evening I sat by myself in my backyard, the last glow of twilight painting the live oak branches gold. I didn't need to celebrate. I didn't need applause. I needed to feel steady again. I poured a glass of old vine red, the kind of California idiosyncrasy Dad had once mocked. I chanted no toasting words. I simply listened to the cicadas and the gentle hum of the air conditioner. The silence was lighter now, not hollow, but restful. I thought about the scar I carried. It wasn't a wound of violence, it was a line where I chose to stand. A reminder that I'd fought for what mattered, not just the business, but the dignity of saying I belong here. 3 years passed. I opened a third Soulstone kitchen location, not because I wanted to prove something, but because I wanted to empower others. I hired several women who had also been overlooked, underserved, dismissed. On opening day, a young chef I mentored cut the ribbon. The sun was high, the crowd cheered, and I stood slightly behind her, letting her take the limelight. Later, a journalist asked me what drives me now. I looked at the question, then said, I don't bake for revenge anymore. I bake for joy, and to remind women that no one can take what they never helped build. The scar remained. It twitched sometimes, in loud voices or in boardroom meetings where old habits die hard. I still flinched when I heard someone say, that's not part of the plan. I still felt a pang when an old vendor assumed a soul had built it. But I looked in the mirror now and saw someone rooted, strong, no longer waiting for validation. I saw a woman who said no to silence, and mean it. Walking through the kitchen tonight, smelling roasted corn and sweet molasses, I felt the weight of all I'd endured. But I didn't carry that weight as shame. I carried it as proof. Proof that roots need tending, that crowns aren't given, they're claimed. I reached out and touched a framed photo on the wall of the first Soulstone kitchen storefront, the place where it all began, and whispered, thank you, for letting me find myself. Sometimes the sweetest thing you can serve is your silence to those who once screamed at your dreams. What this story taught me is simple, but powerful. Sometimes, family doesn't break your heart all at once. They chip away at it, little by little, with entitlement disguised as love. But boundaries aren't cruelty, they're survival. Have you ever had to choose yourself over the people who raised you? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story moved you, or made you think twice about the word family,